Hi everyone, welcome to today's session around defining your holistic patch management strategy. My name is Heinrich Pelser. Today's session is going to be all around looking at the definition of strategy, specifically towards patching. You know, some of the nuances, the bits that sit outside of I would argue, the sort of general ignorance that surrounds managing updates and upgrades of systems, sort of predominantly. Today's session is very much focused around a very open, informal conversation around the nuances that we need to think about. So looking at it holistically, it's not just looking at, um, I know I need to patch, I know I need to look at security, but why these things matter and how they can be used and sort of dissected to help form a sort of clearer picture about the strategy that the business has to take going forwards, specifically around keeping things safe and keeping things secure and so on. So again, this is very much just a sort of knowledge sharing session, an idea sharing session from PowerON platforms today to kind of help feed into that, and really the sort of key takeaways for today would be around, matching how you guys potentially are working. If you're looking for advice and help and support on that from the information today, can this fit anywhere? Is there any questions and so on? So it's more just around spurring on and creating a bit of a conversation more than anything else, right? So for those of you who know us, we're PowerON Platforms. We operate across sort of three key areas within our business. We offer a range of managed services, professional services, and naturally support. We focus across quite a wide breadth of technology sets. So we're an EM&S house, usually is kind of what we're best known as, what we're famous for. But we also do lots of work within the Azure stack as well, but primarily, our managed services focus around the desktop stack. We've got some key clients, some people we've been working with for a long time across obviously a sort of wide sway, both private sector and public sector as well. And then naturally, as you'd expect, to keep marketing happy, some of the traditional accolades around PowerON platforms being part of the EMNS Elite Partnership Program gives us really good inroads to the teams at Microsoft responsible for the sort of EUC side of things. And then we've got relevant gold competencies across cloud platforms, data center, and obviously Windows devices as well, right? Excuse me. Today's agenda is nice and straightforward. We'll be looking at, why does any of this matter? We'll be looking at some of the gaps that we, sort of come across and think about when it comes to the patching side of things. How we can maybe look to simplify and, make this easy to adopt and change. How this can help build that strategy for us. And then towards the tail end of it, it's around, what we've done for other organizations, how we've helped them, as well. Um, Today's session was very much inspired around a very simple idea. This is a quote from Abraham Lincoln. I guess it's true. It's on the internet, so that means it must be true. But I wanted to make sure that we take a sort of learning from this in the idea that planning and having a strategy is quite an important aspect of most business facets these days. But how that can be then adapted into something that can get often missed, uh, ironically, which is patching, right? So I wanted to sort of dig into the reasons why we patch and why it matters. So we're looking at some of the social and the technical side of things and how to build that strategy and how to feed into that strategy. And effectively, a strategy is a plan of action designed to achieve long-term or meet an overall aim. Right? What does that mean within your organization? How are you going about it currently? Right? So to help answer this and to provide a little bit of context, we need to understand, why do we patch and why do we need to define the strategy, right? So naturally, we have end users, they have devices, and we need to keep them safe and secure. So one of the big reasons why patching matters and why organizations have to do it is around this idea around things like vulnerability management, right? So there can be holes or blockers or problems within software that allows, cyber attackers a sort of way in at times, right? And lots of patching based products and solutions and services focus around this idea around security. Um, so to give some context around that, a usual scenario is a cyber attacker can, seem like a cyber attack can seem like an impossibility at times, until it becomes a reality. It almost feels like this happens to everyone else, and when it does happen, it feels like it's completely out of the blue without any warning. But quite often, security patches are available prior to, you know, some things being hacked. I know WannaCry is a sort of classic cliche example that gets used a lot. So, help. So the patching side of things again is designed to help mitigate some of these things. Bug fixes. sometimes when people develop software and make software, it's very difficult to have that tested across every type of scenario and every type of sort of consideration around how people might use it, which devices they may be using whilst using your applications or a service or software, even hardware at times. So there can sometimes be little hiccups or shortcomings within an app. So in testing, a lot of the time ready for production, things can easily get missed. It's hard to cater for absolutely every use case. So in order to mitigate and help with this, vendors typically make changes on the fly. You'll hear things like hot fixes and patches and all those types of things being used. Usually a hot fix is something that can be applied to a machine or an application without it requiring a sort of reboot, so to speak. But again, it kind of feeds into why we patch and why patching matters as well, right? Again, in conjunction, again, kind of tying things back to a security look and feel and making sure that we plan for this, it's around protecting productivity is another reason why obviously patching matters, right? So one of the unexpected consequences of any type of cyber attack is a loss in productivity, and these can result in things like system downtime, right? So in many ways, there's, I kind of put it there, there's this sort of two types of way that the business loses. It's the cost of doing nothing, and there's obviously a huge loss in productivity. So you have this staggered effect. It's the same kind of concept. If someone slams on their brakes on a, in the middle of a motorway, it affects traffic 5 miles back. Things do start to slow down and obviously build up. So there's lots and lots of ways of trying to mitigate that through a sort of decent patching process as well, right? You're also trying to protect against personal data becoming a problem, right? Making sure that things are patched and up to date, and you have the right sort of processes in place, can also be critical to success if you're looking at things from a security perspective. A lot of the times we see personal data, not being massively valued, or personal files and information being stored on local devices. It's not unheard of that sort of hackers can use personal information to get into one system and then another system and then another system and then another system. If, for example, credentials aren't often changed or they're not mitigated properly as well, right? Helping the spread of that particular attack can be massively mitigated through basic and secure patching of your environment, whether that be something that takes care of, again, tying it back to vulnerabilities, bugs, and so on as well, right? Obviously, key to that is something that we take very seriously. It obviously ties back to a good thing that the marketing team have put up there, the ISO standards, and I know Cyber Essentials Plus is something we talked about recently as well. But making sure that you keep things nice and secure and patched and up to date is one of the ways you keep customer data safe as well, right? So organizations have a responsibility to safeguard the information that your users entrust in your systems. Um, there can be severe consequences for companies that fail to live up to that standard. So not that long ago, I think it was 2017, Equifax was part of a major breach, and I think they refer to them as the Federal Trade Commission in the US. Has ordered the provision of $125 for 10 years for all of the people affected as part of that, which is a huge loss. It's reputational and so on as well, right? And part of their breach was a lack of security patching, and in conjunction with that, it's something that the organization expects you to do. As part of a service that IT provides, IT is obviously the enabler. The likelihood is there's probably a sort of assumed responsibility a lot of the time that IT is keeping data safe and keeping end users safe and keeping things nice and secure and functioning and working, and having an environment where things are safe, things are secure, bugs are taken care of, vulnerabilities are obviously managed through a sort of decent patching process. It's going to be a critical and can be considered a sort of obviously a very valuable business asset as well, right? Um, so this is around why patching itself matters, right? But what are some of the challenges and risks that IT themselves face, right? One of the biggest things we're seeing at the moment is, ironically, hence the sort of um, spark for this webinar, was around the lack of a plan, the lack of a strategy, the lack of a long-term aim with a lot of this, right? Um, your approach to patching will sort of very drastically alter and change and warp based on what your organization does and how you approach security overall, how much money you have to spend. But one of the biggest risks around sort of management taking on board this, or sort of senior IT staff taking this on board, is the lack of a decent plan, um, and making sure that the right steps are taken and a good starting point is made, is very much critical to success. And I put at the top there that mindset is everything, right? We're in a very dynamic world. Okay. Naturally, there's risks associated with everything from going to the loo to crossing the road and so on. But usually we have good inbuilt learned behavior that is based on a mindset, to look when there's traffic coming, right? To take care when walking up the stairs, and so on and so on. The same sort of methodology and thinking needs to be adapted in terms of IT. We know things like Windows 10, it constantly evolves. We know that, for example, services, tooling, patching, and so on is something that is now becoming, it's never going to go away, basically, especially if you have anything traditional and on-premise. The other problem, and one of the risks that gets identified a lot of the time, is that it's a very time-consuming process, right? It costs money, it can be repetitive, unrewarding, and so on. So one of the risks there is that, things can start to slow down. People can start to forget or leave it, or there's the diffusion of responsibility that comes in, especially around things like manual processes. You should look to automate. You should look to start thinking about how you can either alter or change architecture to help negate or reduce the potential amounts of patching required as well, right? But it can be a very time-intensive exercise, which in itself, from an IT perspective, is a risk, because you want those teams, IT teams, to be helping users, making sure that projects get delivered as well, right? One of the larger risks associated to this, again, is around things like service downtime. Taking a business critical service offline can cause major disruption. Imagine patching Exchange if you still have something like that on premise, or taking CRM down whilst you're updating or upgrading it as well, right? That in itself can be a massive risk. How that's mitigated and controlled in terms of a consideration for IT management or IT leadership is obviously going to be quite a key part of the decision-making process, and should absolutely factor into how that strategy is developed and maintained, and how you learn from that, and how you alter your thinking as part of that as well, right? One of the other risks and problems that IT faces is out-of-date services and physical hardware. You can have sometimes project after project start forming as you start one, where things get identified along the way. But in terms of the risk, there is, if I have a system, something, let's say, if we take a cliche example, Server 2008 or Windows 7, for example, that it's still running around active in my organization, that can be a massive risk to my organization and my business, and even then the end user. And the knock-on impact of that can be exacerbated throughout. There could be reputational damage, there could be risk to the business, there could be data loss, there could be financial risk. All of these things start to negate and start to add up, and it's a definite risk for organizations to start thinking about and how they manage that. Coupled in with that is around things like negative system functionality. It is a huge risk for IT. The reason that becomes quite prominent is you, with the best intentions, can look to secure and harden the system, only to find that actually this particular patch is something that has caused, sort of detriment. It's having a negative effect as well, right? Um, Someone like Microsoft will test its security patches on a wide range of software before releasing it, but the urgency of releasing a patch sometimes, can preclude them from testing the patch with every possible configuration. Businesses that use the software developed in-house, and security patches, can come up with unexpected sort of system behavior, or there's additional consequences that may not be factored into a bulletin or anything like that, right? So having, again, the relevant change management and change processes and back-end architecture from a service delivery perspective also needs to be factored in to your strategy as well, right? But there are, ways of mitigating a lot of this as well, right? Um, in terms of some of the gaps and stuff that these then obviously then start to highlight, what do they look like, and how do they fit into the, the sort of wider overarching piece of building and coming towards a sort of strategy, right? So in terms of some of the commonalities you can start to see here, there is this initial need to know what we're patching, what are we maintaining, what are we responsible for, right? And this is a common question that gets asked, and you can get a varied sort of answer set within internal teams as well as then upper management. Sometimes expectations can be misaligned, right? Do you know what you are responsible for patching, and why do they matter? 9 times out of 10, no real priority is defined. So no one knows that in terms of the classifications. Do we patch finance more than we patch HR? Do we have to make sure that the financial systems within our remit of IT is patched at a certain rate because there's regulatory compliance as part of that, right? And so on, which then leads into that in itself can be identified that there's no formal ownership or process that's part of that as well, right? And obviously organizations could then start to have these gaps in thinking where it's a big bang approach, it's throwing things out, right? So testing and more testing and testing of these things can become difficult. It can be a big gap in your capability set, and also needs to be factored in around some of the mitigation measures, which we'll get onto in a moment as well, right? And then, ironically, more than anything, visibility and reporting is quite a key factor as well. So, with all of these things then sort of tied together, what are some of the plans around mitigating them, right? So, as with anything, the first thing you need to start to think about is naturally starting a plan, right? So, the sort of tying it back to that mindset side of things as well. When you have a process-based mindset model, you need effective ways of making sure that things are planned for, things are nicely deployed, and then off the back of that, monitored. And then finally, as with anything, the real secret to success here, especially anything long term as part of the strategy, you know, um, optimizing things. Can this be automated next time round? What have we learned from this particular experience as well, right? All of those things need to be factored in to the sort of planning of this. Other things that need to be taken into account in terms of mitigation, how to start easing and bringing some of those gaps closer down, is around things, do I, who's responsible for this? You is it a person? Is it a team? Is patching even currently a problem? You might think it's not, and that's fantastic, and obviously good luck into the future. You guys seem to have obviously had a better start and sway than most. But the reality is at times, most organizations that we speak to, because of the current change, are finding it harder and harder to keep, at the very least, users up to date because of the sparse nature of now lots of people being at home because of the current pandemic as well, right? Um, Even in factoring to the planning as well is, if I don't have the resources for this, if I don't have the time for this, is it a good idea to offload this? Do I need to change my plan to an outsourcing model? All of these things can be part of, mitigating some of those gaps as well. Another sort of good mitigation measure based on the sort of previous points is around auditing. We talked about not knowing what's going on and where things are, so getting a grip on what you're responsible for, hardware and software wise, it is going to be critical to that success. Do you know where it is and what it is? I see lots of organizations deploy software updates to hardware and services that they're not quite sure the purpose of them or understand the remit of them, or they're just blindly doing things because it's part of their sort of remit. So a sort of constant reassessment of the audit criteria of what you're responsible for, you know, is obviously a good thing. And then we sort of talked about that categorization. How do we start defining priority? And it can be very basic. You could work very closely with the organization to start looking at critical, important, and actually, I don't care. You can start classifying your software according to that. This is a business critical service. This is a very important service, and these systems are low weight for us. If they go down, there's a restore model. We don't have to make them high, whatever the case might be. But understanding that and then acting accordingly to provide that business value and security and confidence in IT is always going to be quite a big thing, right? The same can go for hardware. People classify hardware in different categories as well, whether that be devices, and even that categorization can then even fall to departments or individuals within those departments if you want to get that granular. But having a core baseline in terms of what's really important, what's critical, what's really important, and what can wait is going to be quite key as part of that as well, right? Um, Assessing your toolbox, to this day, it staggers me um, how organizations have got such a wide plethora of choices, such a wide plethora of options when it comes to a physical mechanism for deploying things, specifically software, in this case, updates. Microsoft have made it very easy for you to adopt patching pro bono. There's Windows Update for Business. A bit more gung-ho in some respects. There's very little granularity, but the point is it's very easy to get this up and running, right? Um, Lots of people have made huge investments in things like EMS. So endpoint manager is a thing. So lots of organizations looking at this going, okay, well, do I put updates down from Intune? Do I do this from um, my SCCM infrastructure? Do I use standard WSUS? Should I use Azure to patch things? Do I just turn this on automatically? Like, what tool is the best tool for this, right? Assessing that based on capability and immediate needs will again help feed into the timelines and the capability sets that you have to cater for from a skills perspective within your team to help manage that patching process. So as with anything, again, it's cliche, but it's quite important. Picking the right tool for the right job is again a sort of key to success and will help mitigate some of the risks around that because of the reporting and functionality that you get as part of that as well, right? Um, an adoption of phases, again, can very much help mitigate some of the basic errors and flaws that we sometimes see in a patching process. Starting small, assessing the impact that that's had, making the relevant changes, and scaling up when the time's right is going to be key to success there, right? Or at the very least, having an expectation of what that takes at a basic, everyday, easy level. So when you do have to react to something severe quickly, you know how quickly your teams are going to be able to react to that, how quickly your tool sets are going to be able to react to that. And then off the back of that, you can then look to scale up, right? Again, a simple way of mitigating some of those basic requirements in terms of any deployment process is you start you control the chaos a little bit. So there's a smooth and simple deployment phase for champion users or power users or people who volunteer to use this if you're going to patch Windows. Let's look at what the feedback is. Let's apply maybe analytics to their devices to see what the impact is on apps and functionality and performance maybe. Get all of that good data in before we look to progress and proceed based on our categorization of updates that we're looking to deliver as part of the as part of patch management, of course, right? Another key aspect of that is communications. Setting the right expectations to end users is going to be quite a big thing, even business users as well, right? IT in itself can be a bit of a thankless job at times because, as with anything, people care about what's in front of them and what they see. Not a lot of people recognize the hard work that goes into standing up a SharePoint environment, standing up a Exchange environment, standing up a database environment, and so on, right? What they care about is right in front of them. Knowing that there's going to be potential downtime, knowing that there's going to be potential disruption is going to be quite, a sort of key thing to start explaining to people so that, the passive resistance when it comes to those things are massively mitigated. And you can stack the odds in your favor by setting that expectation. Also, a good visible way of seeing how people react to things if they know that it's coming. You reduce risk in several ways as part of that. Again, it depends on user base to user base. IT likes to sometimes make sweeping statements about how people work. They're often surprised when they look at analytics and data over a long period of time as well, because things chop and change quite heavily. But end users are quite comfortable with disruption. Um, we seem to accept the change when we have MOTs, when we have to have a meeting at work that disrupts your day. There's updates on your phone and on your Xbox console, which a lot of people are used to, so transferring that one step down to maybe a device, whether that's an app on a device or the device itself that you need to update or upgrade, it is something that's becoming a bit more of a commonality now, but the right communication plans as part of this is going to be key. And as with anything, monitoring it, really, really monitoring it, looking at your compliance views, to keep an overall score is vital to success here. So you'll know a starting point. Lots of tools these days will tell you what is missing. So you need these updates from Microsoft or from your security vendor. There are easy ways of identifying that. We've done that with lots of organizations, specifically within the NHS and things like ATP and all those types of things, which can identify vulnerabilities and gaps in applications, and you can have third-party patching. as well as in from a compliancy perspective, right? So the business might have a regulatory reason or a compliancy reason to stay at a certain patch level, at a certain version of particular software. Monitoring that is going to be, sort of key to your success, and will give you a much better view so you can start planning and making decisions based on data as time goes on. We've done some stuff. One of my colleagues, Raphael, has created a nice Power BI sort of reporting element as well. That's available on the website if that's of any interest. But it's a very good tool to start looking at how you can get some insights into your patching tools and some of the good and nice to see data as part of that, not just for teams, as in IT teams, but also for management as well, right? So with all of that said and done, how do we kind of summarize this up? So how does all of this, fit into a plan? What's the sort of purpose, the end goal here to help start defining a bit of a refined strategy, right? Um, as with anything, we're looking to make sure that things are process driven. Reacting to a situation the whole time is a very good way to fail pretty quickly. So making sure you have the right process driven activities in to help support that, can really start making a sort of huge difference, especially if you're going to look to start adopting a bit more of a refined approach, right? So what are some of the sort of commonalities that we can see as part of this, right? So there's some key supporting items to consider as part of this, right? We've already touched on some of them, so I wanted to paint a bit of a sort of summarized picture of everything that we're discussing here today, right? So we're looking at things like compliancy reporting, getting visibility of where you are, where you need to be, what are the gaps, right? So that can then feed into it as well, right? Organizations should very quickly start leveraging and looking at things like analytics, right? Getting that, we talked about understanding where you are in terms of do you have a good grip across your assets, right? Things like desktop analytics can be a very quick and easy way to start looking at basics around compliancy. Sorry, not compliancy, compatibility. You can start to create inventoried lists of your hardware and your software as well, right? So using that analytics in conjunction with your compliance reporting can be a very, sort of powerful way of getting a really good view of your environment. Good communication, not just both to end users, but also setting the expectation internally to IT or people responsible for that side of the fence, whether that's the SOC, whether that's, the infrastructure team, that this is something that, needs to be carefully crafted, setting the right level of expectation in what's required, what's expected, and so on, are all going to be, sort of help feed into this process driven mindset. Automation is going to be key. Looking at what you can get rid of. There's to sort of coin a technical term, there's ADRs within SCCM, which are referred to as automatic deployment rules. Setting those up to make sure that definition updates for Windows Defender happen every day on the fly on anyone who has an SCCM agent can be quickly automated as well, right? And then making sure that everything is properly assessed on a regular basis and things are, prioritized as well. So if you're then looking at a basic deployment stream, as we talked about already, a sort of very easy, simple to use structure is new updates become available. We assess them based on the criteria, right? So we look at them in terms of, okay, this one's critical. This one we care about a little bit less than that because this is an important one. And actually this one fixes a feature. This is a bug fix. Is anyone affected by this bug? If the answer to that is no, no real reason to deploy it maybe. All right, maybe you introduce some risk by deploying something that fixes something that isn't a problem for you. All right, so making sure that assessment piece happens and your classifications take effect is going to be a key to success here as well, right? Next stage is again a test and review stage. Okay, we've decided what we want to go ahead and deploy. Let's test that mechanism. Is the tool capable of doing that based on my maintenance window? Am I targeting the right people? How does it affect those users? And so on. Simple UAT group, um, can really start helping with that deployment motion. Reviewing it and adapting based on feedback and analytics, again, is going to be a key phase as part of that as well, right? And then you can start looking at your deployment, your update deployment motions, your phases. Okay, the UAT group and my tests have gone quite well. I'm now going to do to the next 10%, followed by the subsequent 20% to get a completed 30%. I'll then go from 30 to 50%. And then once I'm at 50% based on my data, I'll deploy the following rest of the 50% as part of that, right? Constant review, compliance, looking at your compliance, reviewing what you've done and taking in the feedback. All of those things coupled with a process-driven mindset will provide you with a refined approach over time. All right, this is very much a sort of organic way of doing things. It's not just a static approach, but making sure that you have factored in all of the elements you see on screen will start driving you towards that refined approach as well, right? Um, Obviously, kind of coming full circle in terms of some of the ways that we've helped and supported organizations across Windows updates, Windows management, security across the desktop estate, as well as the server and the cloud estate as well, can be centered around things like strategic help. We've done lots of work within the NHS recently because of their recent sort of, as I say recent, it's been around for a while actually. They got given access to Windows 10 Enterprise as well as then Defender ATP. And as part of that, we've done some strategic work in helping to help IT teams identify potential applications that are, or third-party applications that are troublesome in terms of security holes. We can help feed into a strategy. We can help start maybe looking at, okay, let's look at how we can optimize something. Let's have a look at how we can automate something as well, right? Naturally, as part of that, we've then spent a lot of time around build and sort of build and progress exercises with organizations. What I mean by that is we've set the tools up. We've put in place the mechanisms to deploy these updates. We've made sure they scale nice and easy as well, right? We've made sure that there's automation built in. We've made sure that the teams are aware of how to use them and they fit the overall business strategy around making sure that things are patched and secure and things are cloud driven maybe, or actually you have a hybrid approach and so on as well. And as with anything, we offer support services. If something breaks or if something, has fallen apart, we've helped organizations to put that back into a ready state. And then naturally towards the tail end of all of those things is PowerON's managed services. I alluded to it earlier. Some organizations have turned to us and said, PowerON, I don't want to deal with this anymore. I would like you to take care of my patching. And so we did. So we use usually existing investments as part of that. We have our own tool sets which we can apply if you don't have the existing investments to use that. But the basic point there is we can take full operational control of the patching side of things to help support the business, free up that team, make use of a good investment in the people that you've sort of hired to work with, and really help just drive sort of change throughout the organization that way, keeping things maintained, monitored, and feeding that back in the whole time to provide that level of confidence to clients that we very much have their backs around that. And those things are obviously all built into regulatory security and SOC teams as well to make sure we can provide the right level of insight based on the criteria which we've been assigned to from a managed services perspective as well. That's everything from me. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to listen to me today. In closing, if you have any questions and you have an account manager at PowerON Platforms, please get in touch with him or her to organize or ask any questions, or if you want to talk more about any of the components we've seen there as well. If you haven't and you'd like to ask one of the team here something, if you can get in touch with us via info at PowerON Platforms. Our website is there as well, poweronplatforms.com. And if you're feeling really old school, there's even a phone number there for you to call if you want to speak to myself or anyone else at the team to help you out with anything. So thank you very much for your time and have a good day.